Lightsabers, the cornerstone of Jedi and Sith combat. There are tales of Force wielders being so powerful that they can dispatch opponents with simply a flex of raw ability. But by and large, when two members of the most prominent Force religions decide to butt heads, the saber is the weapon of choice. Having been beings who have spent their entire lifetimes mastering this sacred blade, an endless analysis have been done on the unique styles of combat and the constructions of these elegant weapons. But sometimes, Force users will take their combat to the unorthodox, the unknown. When raw power in the Force, nor a single blade suits them, they choose a weapon of unpredictability. Some weapons they even made as unpredictable as the living Force itself. These rarities always make for some of the most interesting battles, and in today's holocron, we are going to be talking about a handful of the strangest and most exotic lightsaber variants in the entire Star Wars galaxy. Of course, at the end, we want to invite you all to comment what you think is easily the weirdest lightsaber variant that you've come across in the lore, and if we happen to miss it in this video, be sure to load up the comments with your suggestions for a potential part 2. But before we enter the Saber Forge, our master craftsmen have informed us that there are those present who have not fully given themselves over to the way of the blade. We are always exploring the strange and unusual that the Force has to offer, so if that ignites your interest, then choose your lightsaber variant and slash that subscribe button. Now acolytes, let us begin. Let's start with the ground rules. Firstly, we don't want this to be a simple checklist of every kind of lightsaber that doesn't follow the traditional mentality. There are a ton of unique lightsaber hilts around the galaxy, from curved hilts to tonfa lightsabers, and even some hilts made from wood and rancor teeth. The main criteria we had for this list, though, was that the variant had to be fundamentally different and alter the way the lightsaber functions and is wielded. Also, it has to rely on kyber technology and be wielded by either a Jedi or a Sith. In the future, we may do a list where we loosen up the rules just a bit to cover a wider breadth of items and lightsabers. But for today, we really wanted to hone in on the true lightsabers that just happen to be very strange in their creation. So with that in mind, we have selected 7 lightsabers from across all of the lore. We chose not to limit ourselves to Legends, canon, or even non-canon and Infinity stories. That way, we could dive into the really weird and obscure without feeling constricted by any continuity. Also, this list is in no particular order, though we have tried to save some of our strangest sabers for last. But to start off, one of the many that we're familiar with is the darksaber, and we believe that this lightsaber sets the tone nicely. This is a famous lightsaber in the lore, especially in recent years in the debut in live action. But who doesn't love the darksaber? It was made by one of the only Mandalorian Jedi in history, Tar Vizsla. Tar Vizsla brought a piece of his own culture over into his Jedi lifestyle, crafting a lightsaber with a shape unlike any other, in a flat wedge-shaped hilt made of pure Beskar, and produced a flat angular blade, one shaped more like a conventional sword. This echoed his Mandalorian heritage, a pride that he kept with him through his entire life as a Jedi. But what truly made the saber unique was its namesake. The darksaber was completely black and seemed to draw all light into it when it was activated, giving it a white outer glow. In almost every single way, it is the opposite to a lightsaber, not just in its design, but in its very sound. When ignited and swung, the darksaber released a high-pitched whistling rather than the low humming of a conventional lightsaber. The darksaber was kept in the Jedi archives and was studied for decades after Tar Vizsla's death. And yet, no Jedi fully learned how it functioned or how it was constructed. To this day, we still haven't been told whether or not the darksaber was an onyx crystal or something else. But if we had to guess, it is likely something from the mines of Mandalore itself. But what truly places the darksaber on our list today is because of its innate property to choose its owner. As we said earlier, a main criteria is that the variant of a lightsaber must possess an aspect which fundamentally alters the weapon's function. And for the darksaber, this aspect is that it is implied to be sentient, or at the very least, has some kind of will of its own. This weapon cannot pass from one owner to the next unless it is won in battle, or in the case of Maul, the user either surrenders it or ceases to become worthy of it. Its rules are sometimes a little ill-defined, but of greatest importance is doing something to prove oneself worthy of wielding it. And even if you do prove yourself worthy, there is a period of learning to attune to the weapon. As we saw in The Mandalorian, the darksaber will resist its wielder and become heavy and ungainly if the wielder does not surrender themselves and become partners with it. But once the wielder fully attunes to the darksaber, the lightsaber will begin to flow freely whether the wielder is force sensitive or not. And what's more, is that it will respond to the user's emotional state by crackling with energy whenever they become angered or distressed. With the darksaber, there is always more to talk about, but we have other variants today that we want to discuss, so let's move on. Let's pivot from a blade that values honor to a blade that discourages honor. Many here are familiar with the forbidden lightsaber form known as Trakata. Trakata was a style which heavily utilized a saber's ability to switch its blade on and off in combat. Users of Trakata will turn off their lightsaber mid-combat in order to bypass an opponent's guard, then switching the weapon back on for a killing strike. This is done to catch an opponent by surprise, to end a conflict quickly. But with that said, its use is contentious in and outside of the lore. Many believe it is a dishonorable move. The Jedi believe it to be unsportsmanlike, and the Sith actually find it to be a weakness, calling it a trick and not a sign of pure victory and power. However, an equally popular school of thought is that one should do whatever it takes to win a fight, and there should be no reason not to utilize a saber to its full function. For the latter group of individuals, we believe that they will greatly enjoy this lightsaber, the Flicker Phase Blade. Coming to us from the Canon Force and Destiny tabletop RPG is this cunning lightsaber variant, a lightsaber that has been modified to allow its blade to ignite and extinguish at completely random intervals. Obviously, a weapon of this kind is incredibly difficult to use, as it may pose to be of much a danger as the wielder as it is to any opponent. But generally speaking, when using the flicker phase, one avoids blocking directly and goes for parries or dodges while attacking ruthlessly. The erratic nature of the blade switching on and off without the user's control completely mitigates an opponent's ability to sense what the user might do, therefore totally erasing one of Trakata's key weaknesses. If even the user doesn't know when it will occur, how can the opponent sense it? There's obviously an argument to be made that a flicker phase blade user would learn how to sense or predict when the blade will switch on and off and can adjust in battle accordingly. However, the unreliability of this weapon could do far more damage than good. Nonetheless though, we found this to be a fascinating blade, and we wanted to bring it to you guys. But let's go ahead and move on. Our next for the strangest variants definitely has to go to the lightsaber parasol from Star Wars Visions. This was an exotic Sith weapon created by Koru, which in actuality was an attachment to her main single-bladed lightsaber. Once the parasol auxiliary was attached to her hilt though, it would produce 8 separate blades and reassemble an umbrella. The weapon also had a spinning function on it much like the Inquisitors, creating a shield of defense or a devastating buzzsaw for attack. I don't consider this to be an elegant weapon by any stretch of the definition though, but it's definitely an intimidating one that can oppress lesser experienced enemies. Since Koru was the leader of a bandit gang which oppressed impoverished worlds, it's likely that she saw a lot of success when brandishing this weapon against local security and bounty hunters. But when meeting an experienced saber wielder, they put this away in favor of the standard lightsaber with a single blade. This indicates that she's aware that the attachment could be a hindrance in an equal fight, and is purely used for intimidation. We also wanted to bring up the blaster saber of Ezra Bridger. Despite it being the first lightsaber he ever constructed, Ezra used great ingenuity in designing a weapon that perfectly suited the era that it was created in. Kanan Jarrus had demonstrated the value of having a lightsaber that blended in with regular tools, as Kanan always kept his lightsaber in 2 pieces. Ezra would then take inspiration from this, along with his wrist-mounted electro slingshot to create a perfect undercover Jedi weapon. I think it's understated just how much skill Ezra actually needed to pull this off. Crafting a lightsaber is already an extremely intensive process, even for any basic kind. But Ezra didn't grow up in the temple, but took a crash course in the Jedi way from a Padawan who never finished his own apprenticeship. Using only the schematics from Kanan and the scrap found on the Ghost, Ezra managed to create a hybridized lightsaber which served 2 functions simultaneously. Later, Kanan would display the potential lethality of the weapon when he expertly employed it against the Grand Inquisitor. He used the blaster function to close the gap between himself and his enemy, before using the lightsaber in conjunction with his own. He would even proceed to rapidly swap between the saber function and the blaster function to catch the Inquisitor off guard. It's quite a bit of a shame that Ezra abandoned this unique design when constructing his second weapon, as his first really showed off his ingenuity, but clearly was not very Jedi-like. But speaking of potential explored, we have a weapon that has made quite a few appearances in both Legends and canon, and one of my favorite personal variants of the lightsaber, the Light Whip. This is one of the more exotic breeds of lightsabers, and one that has made its round in both continuities. Their internal workings permitted the containment field of the lightsaber plasma blades to be flexible, and instead of pulling from energy from one large crystal, they contained multiple small crystals, and the plasma in the blade had no cell barriers to keep it straight. They were often several meters in length and extremely complicated to wield effectively. Not only does one have to know how to use a regular whip first, but you have to be able to use it without the flexible blade ever touching you. The light whip was a rare and an exotic weapon, an unfamiliar occurrence among traditional duelists. Due to this though, light whip practitioners enjoyed considerable leverage over enemies. Along with its rarity, light whips also featured copious range, and the weapon was difficult to defend against, as it could simply flex around an enemy's blade when they attempted to parry. Light whips also come in a variety of different colors and forms, such as is the case with Vernestra from Canon. She could switch her lightsaber form to a regular blade from a whip mode at will, although she kept this function a secret. And then you have the far superior light whip, Lady Lumaya, who fashioned her light whip to have multiple tassels, some energy and some physical. Lumaya's weapon was made out of Mandalorian iron, which is Legends for Beskar. This allowed her to use energy tassels to be used with the physical in conjunction. This reinforced its strength and made it even deadlier. But as strong as light whips can be, they had a vast amount of drawbacks. Many weaknesses. There's a larger chance of one maiming themselves with a light whip if they're not sufficiently trained or if a battle goes wrong. But also, the whip blades were far weaker than regular lightsaber blades. They could not always successfully penetrate durasteel, and there were many substances that could survive a direct hit, usually only scoring hits on armored enemies rather than cutting straight through them. Not to mention, it needed to be swung out widely to gain momentum for an attack, leaving the user open. It also had pathetically little defense, as there were very few techniques in the way of parrying with a light whip. Not to mention with the multiple small crystals in place of one larger one, the tassels were known to essentially short out, and could break when hit with enough force. There has been a reason that Lumaya included the metal tassels on hers. The primary advantage of the light whip though, is that most people are completely unprepared to face it, and cannot predict its erratic blade properly. This is its main reason, its main trick. But it has been proven that when one uses enough speed, or brute strength, they can bulldoze a light whip wielder, such as Luke Skywalker and Lumaya. And of all of the exotic lightsaber variants, this one is one of the worst options, at least in our opinion, while at the same time also being one of the cooler variants. But now we're getting into the real weird weapons and strange lightsabers. And honestly, lightsabers that don't get a lot of love from the fan base, and some of them outright get hated on. The first of which is the Soul Saber. The Soul Saber comes from the Star Wars tabletop RPG and is the centerpiece of the Child of Light campaign saga. These campaigns currently fall under the unlicensed category, but since the campaigns are recognized as legends, we thought we would go out on a limb and include the Soul Saber on our list. The Soul Saber is called the ultimate dark side weapon and was created at some point before 20,000 BBY by a dark Jedi whose name has unfortunately been lost to the annals of history. The saber had a black hilt with a brosnium wrapping and a metal emitter shaped like the mouth of a dragon. The blade produced from its mouth is a deep amethyst color with a black core. It was said that flecks of red also flashed up and down the length of the blade. Some believe that the lightsaber was more of a manifestation of the dark side and its energy than a simple energy blade. And because of its rare, terrible properties, it has been labeled as an abomination to both the light and the living force. So what even is the Soul Saber? Well, it's broken down like this. It's essentially its own dark side nexus, and its presence could be felt by anyone standing within 10 meters of it. Even non-force sensitives would begin to feel sick and uneasy, while force sensitive not aligned with the dark side would begin to get terrible headaches, nausea, and find it difficult to concentrate. The purpose of the Soul Saber was to destroy life and to corrupt. Simply igniting the blade, the wielder would be hit with negative emotions like anger and fear. They can feel nothing but aggression, and the weapon whispers promises of glory and great power. This saber truly hates the light side also. If a being attuned to the light side attempts to touch the lightsaber, they are immediately hit with a backlash of dark side energy. Any being that is unfortunately tagged or struck by the blade would feel as though they were being stabbed by an agonizing cold and were flooded with emotions of despair. It even acted like a virus of the dark side. But while this was occurring, their very life force was being siphoned away from them. This despicable lightsaber actually fed on those that it injured and killed, all the while empowering the one wielding it. The life energy it drained, it fed into its wielder, allowing them to fight with relentless stamina, even when at death's door. It was said that those who used the Soul Saber were unaware that they were so close to death, even if they had been mortally wounded. It was simply too intoxicating. But one of the other major drawbacks of the lightsaber was that it tempted all dark side wielders near it. which meant that the wielder's allies would turn on them and attack them to get the blade. Still, themselves hearing the whispers and promises of power emanating from the lightsaber, no matter who possessed it. This sinister tool was used by a singular Dark Jedi against a group of Jedi Masters on the planet of Bamor Jal. Once he was finally defeated, the Jedi placed the Soul Saber in the Cavern of Light, hiding it away on a distant world, using a light side nexus to mask the saber's potent dark side energy. And with that, guys, comes our last pick. It is sort of cheating in our own rules though, but we think that there are a few weapons that fundamentally alter the entire function of a lightsaber, and one of the best examples of that is the lightsaber rifle. The lightsaber rifle is exactly what it sounds like. It's a rifle that shot lightsabers. A Jedi need only to load their lightsaber into the top slot of the rifle. Then, it would use all of that saber's kyber crystal and the power cell to fire highly destructive beams of kyber energy. One could fire the weapon at least 5 times before the lightsaber hilt inside is completely melted and destroyed. This weapon made an appearance in canon following Order 66, in the storyline when Jocasta Nu returned to the Jedi Temple to gather important information. Jocasta ended up using her own lightsaber with this weapon against Lord Vader, but as powerful and destructive as it was, Vader still managed to deflect all of the blaster bolts, as Jedi are trained to do. Jocasta would then almost successfully escape, setting the rifle to self-destruct, blowing out a sizable hole in the temple's wall. The origin of the rifle is a complete mystery, and we find it to be an incredibly confusing weapon, frankly. We mentioned this before, but a lightsaber rifle fundamentally goes against all philosophies of the Jedi in relation to their lightsabers. Lightsabers are swords meant to be used as shields, an elegant tool which displays a Jedi's restraint. It shows that while they could do more to their enemy, they very purposefully do not. It's a symbol of their authority, their peace-loving nature. To load that symbol into a gun that fires it at maximum power seems very counterintuitive to their entire philosophy. And that is probably why it was kept deep hidden in the archives, likely confiscated by the Jedi who originally made it. But technically, it does fulfill our criteria of requiring kyber technology, constructed and used by a force wielder, and fundamentally altering the way a lightsaber functions. So we think that it definitely earned a spot among some of the most unusual lightsaber variants. And there you have it, my friends. This is definitely a topic that we've talked about a few times before, but we are always eager to revisit it when we find new blades and new lightsabers in the lore that we want to bring to you. Acolytes, if you made it this far into this video, begin your comment with "so uncivilized" and tell us which one of these lightsabers would you choose to wield. As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the channel in the archives, and may the Force be with you.